丼が語る言葉をお上がりよ。
Welcome back to Foodie Friday, the show where we bring anime and video game food to life. This week on Foodie Friday, I really wanted to play around with some steak. But I did pick up a couple of cool new gadgets that we're gonna try today for Yukihira's Chaliapin steak. Where are my steaks? First thing we need to do is dice quite a few onions. I'm gonna use about 3 or 4. Boom, just like that, we have diced onions. In truth, I forgot to record dicing some onions. Now in the original recipe, it says to use 1.5 to 2 onions, but since I'm doing 2 larger steaks, I opted for about 4. You want your onions to look about that. This way we'll get a nice even coating with them and we won't have to worry about not being able to cover enough of our steak. Now for our steaks. Yukihira ended up using really cheap cuts of meat, but I did buy these at my local Costco and they're really nice New York steaks. But that doesn't mean you can't use a cheaper cut like a flank steak or strip steak or anything like that. Feel free to use whatever steaks you want. You're going to have a similar effect, but these will taste really nice with these New Yorks. Now since these steaks are pretty thick, I'm gonna go ahead and fillet one of them, but we're gonna keep this one whole. Yukihira ends up pan frying his steak, but we are also going to sous vide the other thicker steak. I can't wait to try both. It also mentioned in the recipe to go ahead and tenderize it if you want to use a meat tenderizer, but I'm gonna go ahead and opt out for not doing it and just kind of evening out the meat just a little bit. Once you have your steaks ready to go, you're gonna go ahead and place them into your pot with all of your onions or a bowl if you're doing that method, and just make sure that they end up being completely covered on the bottom and on the top, and then we'll go ahead and pack everything down. Like I had said, this recipe is fairly straightforward. The only other thing we need to do is get our rice going, which we already have, just rinsed it until it was clear and got it into our rice steamer. Now we have to make our umeboshi paste. I had to drive quite a ways into Portland to pick up some of this paste, and I will say, it's not even paste, these are actually whole plums. They're pretty worth it. I think I've only had umeboshi a couple of times and they were always in jelly donuts. But these are incredibly salty, but they're making my mouth water thinking about trying them, and we're just gonna go for it. Oh, yeah, that's good. It has a pit in it. Eat the pruny ball. You get no napkins, lick your palms. I'm thinking all I'm gonna do is really pit some of these plums and turn it into my own paste or my own kind of puree, keeping it a little chunky so that way it'll fold into the rice really nicely. Now what's really cool about using a sous vide method as well is that we can incorporate our marinade or our rub directly onto the steak while it's cooking. So I'm gonna make a really quick white miso rub and glaze and add that to our steak once it's ready to cook.
I used a little bit of white miso and some water to kind of bring it together, and then added a bit of maple syrup to sweeten it.
So our timer's just gone off. That means we get to pull out all of our steak and onions. So I know it's only been about 30 minutes, and like Hit had said, I think 30 minutes is a good time, especially for some of the thinner steaks, but you can go a little bit longer with something that's a little bit thicker like this New York that we have here that's uncut. However, because of the enzymes in the onions, I wouldn't really go over more than maybe 2 hours on any of it, just because then you're gonna start to see some discoloration in the actual meat. Go ahead and remove the onions from the steaks. I think this is one of our smaller ones, yep. You can already see there's a little bit of discoloration in these steaks from the onions, and that's going to happen. It's not a bad thing, but if it sits too long, again, it may end up hurting the texture of that steak. And this one is actually going to get the miso rub before we throw it into our sous vide. The only other thing with sous vide is that once you actually have a marinade on there and it's going to cook in the bag, make sure you season it how you want before you finish it.
After hitting it with salt and pepper, gently lower your steak into the bag, trying to get all of that nice glaze on there, and then proceed to tenderize the meat a little bit.
So there is our beautiful miso marinated New York that's going to go into the sous vide. So we have our regular steaks and our miso steak for the sous vide. These are just gonna get salt and pepper and fried in the pan after frying the onions, so we have some work to do. Grab your steak, pop it into your sous vide water. I have mine going right now for a hopefully medium rare once it's done. It's gonna take about an hour. This is Rindo, because she's hot and fiery. What's really cool about the Chef Step sous vide machine is that it works off of a smart app on your phone, and I wanted to show you guys that process, but I do use my cell phone to record everything, so This is set at a medium rare, hopefully 129 degrees once everything is said and done. This is gonna take about an hour, and then once it's done or close to done, we're gonna start firing the other 2 steaks to kind of gauge how close they are to each other. So now Rindo is ready and we're getting ready to start frying up our steaks. We have our plum paste ready, we have our rice ready, we gotta do our onions and some sauce. I'm doing this in a cast iron pan, so what we're gonna do according to the recipe is go ahead and start frying up some of our onions, remove those from the pan, add some butter, then fry the steak in that same pan, then remove the steak and make sauce. Let's do it. So what I'm doing is I'm actually trying to get a nice little bit of a char on these onions so they get a little bit more fried than caramelized. I don't want them to be too soft like you would with a really nice caramelized onion. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna pull these off. These still have a little bit of a bite and we're gonna set these to the side while we cook our steak. Once your butter is nice and melted, before it starts to brown, add your steak.
So once we add our steak, we're gonna leave this undisturbed until it's ready to flip and then let it rest on a cooling rack. Once you deglaze your pan with some red wine, hit it with some soy sauce, let it reduce, add your cornstarch, and then you're gonna finish it with just a small dab of butter.
This is one of those moments. So the stage is set for our first set of steaks. Now we have to set up our miso steak so that way we can have them both ready at the same time. Let's do the miso.
So for the miso steak, we're gonna do the same process. Brown the onions, remove the onions, add your steak, sear the steak, and make some sauce.
We have both steaks ready. Let's go ahead and plate up the first steak.
For my umeboshi rice, I ended up adding the rice and umeboshi to a separate bowl before I plated up. I also sliced my New York ahead of time before I decided to plate up just to make it a bit easier to eat.
I'm eating this.
Once you have your steak cooked to the right temperature that you want, go ahead and place it right on top of your rice. Add a bunch of onions, like a lot of onions. Keep adding onions and then fill it with sauce, like a lot of sauce.
There's our first Yukihira style Chaliapin done, and now we have to do the miso. You know what, we're going big. This is our sous vide miso New York. It's the best part, right here at the tail. I can't explain to you the flavors involved in this right now.
We're once again going to go ahead and slice our New York and place it on top of our rice and pile it on with as many onions as you want. I like a lot of onions and a lot of sauce.
So I had to call the wife for this one. She's coming downstairs and I already know which one I like more, but I have to have her take on this. And she has to use the chopsticks to try to cut the steak. So this is the original. We all know which one this is. So go ahead, try it. Try it with, try the steak first and then maybe try it with the rice. Is it good? Is it like buttery? Do you want some too? Come here. Steak. Oh, why did you fart? God. Can't help it, so you ruined the mood, cat. Okay, so this is our miso sous vide steak that I had a little problem coming to my feet for. I may or may not have gotten on my knees for that one. No, that's mine. That's my big bowl. What's it? This is what I have to deal with. This is what I have to do. It's okay, we have some left. All right, I'm just borrowing this. Because all in all, yes, this is a fantastic recipe and it actually is really easy to make. But man, adding a little bit of that miso glaze and doing it with the sous vide method just ups the game so much more. And granted, you don't have to do that. Remember, old is gold. Okay, this is good. The onions themselves add a lot of body and flavor to the overall dish, and you can also taste some of it on the actual steak. What's your favorite way of making a steak? Honestly, this has to be one of my new favorite ways, and I'm gonna have to play with this some more. And the umeboshi, that is such a nice touch. My name is Chef PK, here on Foodie Friday, bringing anime and video game food to life. Get subscribed, and remember, keep playing with your food. So good. Rachel, do you want this one? Do you want the miso one? Whichever one you want to give me. Of course I'm going to give you the miso one because happy wife, happy life.